these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold these truths with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, everybody. This week, there will be thousands of advocates for the pro-life cause up here in Washington, D.C. And so I wanted to talk about this difficult issue today. And I wanted to talk about it with Marjorie Dannenfelser. She's the president of Susan B. Anthony List, a national pro-life group. Marjorie, thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, it's my privilege. Thank you for having me. Well,
we're going to have a great conversation about the state of the pro-life movement, I think, is I think what I really want to start with. If you don't mind, though, I want to read a little bit more of your bio so people know your history. You were the national co-chair of the Pro-Life Voices for Trump Coalition, appointed to Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission by the U.S. Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell. And you've been named one of Politico Magazine's top 50 influencers. You've worked in Congress as the staff director of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus and worked for U.S. Rep. Alan Mollahan. You live here in Arlington, Virginia, attended Duke, and all in all, do great work for this cause. So, Marjorie, maybe I want to start with, what is your assessment of the current state of the pro-life movement? Because from my angle, if you look at the history of it and where we've been and where public opinion is, it seems to be going well and in our favor. Should we be optimistic?
I think we should. And I think you have been right at the center of some of the most convincing arguments without going on offense as you do and some of your best colleagues do. We would not be where we are. I think going on offense also politically in campaigns was a real turning point. It's what the Susan B. Anthony List focus and founding was about, was going on offense on this, on the most important human rights battle of our time, arguably, given the death toll about abortion. It is something that we should have a very strong, aggressive political arm. We should be stronger than the tobacco industry. That was around the time we started. They were pretty strong. It should be stronger than any lobby that exists. And so that was sort of the idea. And also that there should be women speaking out, women who reflect the majority view of women, but also reflect what we know about the complementary nature of human rights. You can never build authentic human rights on the broken rights of another person. All of this going on offense, being proud of who we are, loving who the pro-life movement is, and being attractive to the other side is winning. And we are at a moment right now where we could possibly see Roe v. Wade, after all this time, almost over 50 years, either completely overturned or largely dismantled, so that states can now be aggressive on this, and the Congress can be as well.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I'm optimistic is because it seems the pro-life movement has become about, it's started to center around women, at least women's voices leading the charge. I don't think men should be discouraged from talking about it. That's nonsense, since half of abortions, of course, must be men.
That's right.
But it certainly used to be. I don't know. I feel like that. It's aggression with purpose now, whereas before it did seem to be just aggression. There's ways to make an argument that are appealing to others who disagree with you, and there's ways that aren't. And I think the movement has just really transitioned to love, to a message about love primarily, right? It's a message about loving life. It's a message about respecting life. It's not about showing people gross and disturbing pictures of dead fetuses anymore. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And it's allowed us to sort of tackle the hardest argument that comes from the other side of it, which is feminism, women's rights. And this is something you write about a lot. You've talked about a lot. How can we talk about being pro-life feminists?
Yeah, I think pro-life feminism is where I entered this. I mean, I was a very vehemently pro-choice person in college, and my mind was changed in the middle of it. But when I did enter this debate on the pro-life side, it was from strongly pro-woman, from the pro-woman perspective. That's why we're called the Susan B. Anthony List. It's the idea that that somehow you gain moral clarity, that somehow you can be free, more free. Having taken the rights away from another human being is simply not the way the founders saw human freedom or natural law. And that's not how we actually behave in daily life in ways that are happy. So, of course, so Susan B. Anthony said many things, and so did her compatriots. They all adamantly disagreed with the idea that abortion was some great liberator. In fact, it really wasn't a thing. Nobody was saying it. The act will burden a woman's conscience in life. It'll burden her soul in the grave, but thrice guilty is the one who drove her to the dreadful deed. She was pretty clear. And then Alice Paul, the original author of the Equal Rights Amendment, called abortion the ultimate exploitation of women. And I think women who've had abortions are some of our best and most beautiful advocates, ones who have dealt with that grief and have worked through the many cloud covers of difficulty and come to a place where they see what they thought was a solution ended up being a symptom of a problem that just made their problems harder. And so I think those are some of our best advocates. And I think that we can all be pro-life feminists because we're all pro-woman. We want to be all pro-woman. So I think, honestly, and you would say this, I've seen you debate. You do a beautiful job, and you always boil it down to the fundamentals. And the truth is, if the other side is right, that when you're pregnant, that it's really what's there is really just the same thing as a tonsil or an appendix or something that just needs to be removed to make you better. Well, then this is the stupidest movement that ever was, because of course we are imposing our odd values on other people. But if that other thing that we're talking about in abortion is another person with equal moral standing as you and I, then it's the most important movement that is. And that is the crux of the whole thing. That I think is where we win. When we start to talk about that, we win.
And so the other side will constantly come back to, well, a convenience issue. They'll come back to it, well, and that's how I describe that. That's not how they would put it. So to be fair, that's not how they would put it. They would say, a woman has a choice. There's hard times in her life. She can't probably care for this baby. It wasn't planned. It's hard for me to have sympathy for that argument, because to me that is a convenience argument. But look, people certainly have very strong emotions about that argument. And my question is, what I'm always searching for is, how do we reach them? What is the right way to reach them? Because they're making what they would claim to be a feminist argument, right? A feminist argument about self-control, taking control of one's life, et cetera, one's right to do what they want. Now, of course, they say with their body. We would disagree with that statement. But from a feminist standpoint, how do you interact with those folks?
Yeah, I'd say what we must do, and what the best feminists always do, is embrace all people. And in this case, it includes embracing the unborn child and embracing her as well. That every single time there is a thought of an abortion, there is a problem that should be addressed, that needs to be addressed, and that the fundamentals of which we, I think, are morally obligated to struggle with and help her through, so that she can be, so that she is able to do what she in her heart of hearts really wants to do. I also think that from a feminist perspective, just from I found, and one of my first reactions when I first came kind of on the other side was like, you think so little of us as a gender that we can't rise to the occasion when difficulties come our way, that somehow we're so lacking in creativity and responsibility, that the only way through this difficult moment is to bring about the death of another person, or even if you're a little bit doubtful about it, that you might be bringing about the death of another person. Think more highly of this gender, that we can work through these problems and handle them with others, with men too, right? So I think from the feminist perspective, we're much stronger, and from any perspective, women are much stronger than they're given credit for, who are facing situations like that. Having said that, I think this moment that we're in, if we're looking at states being very ambitious on limiting abortion, there are about 30 states that could be pretty much right away. So we're seeing, a pretty big revolution coming. I think we also do have a responsibility to state by state really do what we're trying to do, work with our allies in doing, and finding resources and support that's available for women when they are facing those situations.
So along these lines, people argue that one of the reasons that you have to adhere to Roe v. Wade and the Supreme Court decision is that women just aren't fully represented in government. About a third of state representatives are women, about a quarter in the U.S. Congress. The argument goes that you have to have complete parity with men, and then you can actually make a legislative decision about this. What do you say to that?
Well, that's pretty ironic because the people who are making that argument are assuming there's only one type of woman who gets elected to public office. Some of your allies that are some of the best advocates for life are colleagues of yours. And in fact, the last Congress, we elected the biggest group of pro-life women to the Congress that ever in history. It was the reason, as Susan B. Anthony list began in the very beginning, was to do just that. I think that the idea that there has to be absolute parity is undemocratic, for one thing. It's certainly not how a country is set up. We don't have absolute parity percentage-wise with particular views, but we are very happy that we do now have at every level of government, including the Attorney General who argued the Mississippi case in front of the Supreme Court, along with her Solicitor General, have very articulate, well-educated, ambitious, smart pro-life women who understand how to make the argument, who believe this profoundly, who represent women far more accurately than the monolith on the other side that is unhappy with any limit on abortion at all. See, that's one of the reasons why we've made so much progress. They want everything under Roe. So any attrition at all is a loss for them. To have any limit, even a born alive limit that wasn't even allowed to get voted on in the Congress, even that is too much of a threat to those who are supporting Roe v. Wade and that feminist, the progressive feminist agenda. But the comparison to that is our friends and our colleagues are working hard in legislatures, including the Congress, that are advocating for a 20-week or a 15-week pain-capable bill, whatever the consensus will allow. So basically, you're contrasting consensus versus no limits whatsoever. And if that's how it's defined, and that's really how it is, that's when we win every single time. And women are in a vital and important central voice in making that argument.
Another point that you make, I think, is instead of advocating for accommodations for pregnant women and mothers in the workforce, abortion advocates have instead insisted that abortion is the only way to achieve parity for women who don't want to choose between motherhood and their work. How have abortion advocates actually gotten in the way of meaningful progress for women on this front?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a good amicus brief on the pro-life women's side at the court that really took this head on and said, that flexibility in the workplace and greater success for women in the workplace has been achieved since 1973, and that it's a place that welcomes women in general, but also women with different setups so that they can care for children. We're not living in the same universe that we were in 1973. There's been a lot of change since then. But to say that abortion is the only way that a working woman can succeed is undermining to her own values most of the time, and also creates a situation where there's pressure to abort in the workplace continually, because that's your way out. That is the standard that Casey set up, partly, that you that you can't live your life unless you have abortion as a way out when you need to. So if that becomes the standard in the workplace, that really completely undermines women and sets up the exploitation of them, because they're not free, frankly, to do what they really feel is important for them to do in their lives, which is accommodate their children while they are working.
And maybe that's why there's pressure lately, and maybe this is a good conversation to be having in conservative circles, which is, what policies can we put in place? What support mechanisms might we put in place that would both encourage the creation of families? Because, like, if we're just taking a very objective look at the country and we see declining birth rates, it's a disaster for any nation. We're better off than most developed countries, but it's still a long-term disaster if we're not properly reproducing and simply replacing ourselves. And there's perhaps a variety of reasons for that, but is that a conversation conservatives should be having, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I think we've had some of those conversations, and one of the things that is beautiful, in my opinion, is that the way democracy works is that in each state there's going to be a consensus for something different in each state, slightly different. Texas is going to be different from Illinois, which is going to be different from North Carolina, et cetera. And some of those conversations that should be had perhaps are about flexibility in the workplace, that it isn't one size fits all in terms of what your benefits might be. That you get to have certain benefits because you have a child that you don't necessarily want if you're single, right? So flexibility in that way. Then also at the same time, Texas is a great example. When Texas passed the heartbeat bill recently, that had that unique enforcement mechanism, so that it actually went into effect. At the same time, Texas legislators passed the Alternatives to Abortion Act, which was a $100 million investment in making that beautiful affirmation of life successful for women and children, so that there was not just a no, there was a yes. And that was a work of consensus of the state legislature of Texas. Maybe it won't be identical in other places, but similar efforts and similar conversations are going on in every legislature that can be ambitious, including the U.S. Congress. And I think you're a part of those. I think in the last administration, we did have some good conversations with the White House about some workplace accommodations that were sort of looking towards the day that perhaps Roe was overturned. Pro-life policies in the workplace. Look, I think, what I don't think, though, is a good idea is a one-size-fits-all for every state. Just because I think what I said before, if by some great miracle Connecticut had a 15-week limit, they're going to have a very different set of policies to support women than Texas will, probably.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, and how do we make adoption more accessible? Because
yeah, I mean, that's the big and it is very different in every state, and there is and should be a lot of pressure on the foster care system in each state to make adoption more affordable and more doable. Meaning that, I mean, the fundamental problem in the adoption battle is when do parental rights when do they stop? Mm-hmm. If you're in a foster care system for 8 years of your young life, they were fighting the rights of the parents. Obviously, were given more weight than the right of the child to grow up within a stable atmosphere. And so much of it has to do with that, loving the parents, giving them what they need, loving the child, giving him or her what that child needs. Now is the moment to get that right. It's in the federal level is harder, but it's certainly some things can be done. It really is a dig in on the state level, state legislative battle primarily, though, I think.
Do you have any examples? I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any examples of some of the obstructions or obstacles that are currently in place that just are antiquated and need to be changed, as far as, because it's very difficult to adopt. And then there's a separate question too of, you always have the biological parents. You got to this question a little bit, which is the rights of the biological parents and how much power they have to exude their influence on the new family. It seems like another barrier to it. So yeah, what can change? Is there low hanging fruit?
I think the low hanging fruit is a change in again, each state is different, but how parental rights are viewed via the rights of the child to live in a stable home. In other words, how long do you wait for parents who are who are opioid addicted or any addiction or abuse in the house? How long do you wait for them to recover? There needs to be an answer to that question, and that perhaps they have visitation over time, or maybe not. But there needs to be some. There has to be some limit, because that is the problem. It is the children that are stuck in foster care from an early age until later, where the parental rights are never severed, because because of the human spirit. You always have hope that things are going to be better, but they just don't. It doesn't turn out that way. I think that's the biggest thing to struggle with. I'm not going to pretend that it's simple, because it's not, but it does take some political will. And I think that's, I think right now, with an overturn of Roe v. Wade and more children, there is a market pressure here that will perhaps maybe some of the costs will go down. That's a big, that is an enormous obstacle. With more children, or perhaps it will be less expensive. And then it's not the case that only the rich can adopt, but states can certainly help with that as well. It's a matter of healthcare coverage and healthcare coverage of the birth mom in adoption, and healthcare, because a lot of these things are really expensive that the state could help with.
And one of the reasons this is always a difficult conversation is because, again, what the other side argues is, well, look, you're just creating these bad situations by not letting the woman have an abortion. And even with all these programs, that's not necessarily an untrue statement. It is a tough situation. But of course, the counter argument back to them is, we acknowledge that these are tough situations that got created, but that doesn't mean that you therefore end a life. There's homelessness is a tough situation. You don't go around rounding up homeless people and killing them. That would be an insane thing to do. You would never allow that. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean that it requires this extreme. But the thing is that they've normalized it, and this is the hardest thing to undo. It's the cultural normalization of abortion, as if it's just a normal thing, and I would imagine, and this is why you see it in the public polling too. I think 2/3 of Americans think that there shouldn't be abortions after 12 weeks, but you drop that number down to 6 weeks, and you're going to get a lot less support for it. So people have this sort of intrinsic valuation that they do to a life as it progresses, like as if it's more valuable. The life is more valuable as it progresses, and how do we kind of undo that? Or is it undoable?
No, I think that's a great question. It's been a question through the ages of all sorts of human rights battles that America has grappled with over time, and I think in this interesting way, the way you described it, especially that about the older unborn child seems more attractive to save than the younger unborn child, and I think I'm obviously 100% pro-life, but I used to be 100% pro-choice. And I think what happened with me was that I kind of got to know got to finally look at what this was about. And I got to know the unborn child in a kind of an odd way of putting it, but you know what I mean? Kind of got introduced to what is the topic here. We can't pretend like that thing isn't there. So what is that thing? So and I think America is doing that now. And because our debate is going to be way more saturated than it is at this very moment. It will be very soon. There will be more conversations. There will be more people alluding to the sonogram on the refrigerator. There'll be more discussion about things that only a few of us know, like that there is surgery. You can have surgery on a 15-week-old baby by taking the baby out, microsurgery, putting the baby back in. That's not an appendix. That's not a tonsil. That's a baby that if you're wanting the baby, you call it a baby. But if you don't want the baby, you're calling it something else. I think other human rights battles have had similar kind of getting to know the victim. It's harder with abortion, but not impossible, because of what we know now about what goes on inside of what goes on inside. And I think what happens is utilitarianism takes over. You think, nah, this is too hard. Like if you don't know the victim or you don't think about him, that is just too hard. Children may be working, in the early last century, 12-hour days, but look, you can't, they need that money. The family needs that money. So we're all really stuck. And also the factories need the extra labor. And if you change things, it's just going to be hard. They're going to starve. Like dire things are going to occur if you disallow child labor, right? But what we do is we try to affirm the human rights of all involved, and as a community, make things better. And clearly, same was true on all sorts of other human rights battles. I mean, abolition is one. That changed the politics. No partisans were interested in that. It was going to completely upset the political map. How is the Southern economy going to survive? Where are they going to live? All of that. Inconvenient.
Right. And that's the cultural argument. And the next question is the political strategy of how we actually get to this point. And I do think the heartbeat bill avenue is an excellent one, because a heartbeat is something that people can wrap their heads around very easily. Mm-hmm. It's hard to call this another appendage of your body if it has a heartbeat. And this is sort of where science has really caught up with the conversation, I think, because that wasn't part of the conversation in the early 70s, it seems to me. But as a question of political strategy, this is where it gets harder, because as there's what would I call it? I mean, there's kind of the purist view, right? 100% pro-life. And that's easy to say. It's a lot harder to do, and half the population probably disagrees with that. Mm-hmm. And the question is, what's our best strategy moving forward politically? Let's say that Roe v. Wade gets overturned in this future case. And I do want to talk about kind of the specifics of that case, that and the legalities of it and what the considerations are going to be. But let's assume it gets overturned. What are states best positioned to do? And because what you don't want to do, just as a politician, I think I intrinsically understand this, what you don't want to do is get too far out ahead of public opinion. Because if you do that, even if you know it's right, there's a good chance that you take one step forward and 3 steps back. There's a good chance that backlash will happen. And so I tend to like the heartbeat bill approach for now. Because here's the toughest question of all, is the exceptions. And do you allow the exceptions at least in this current environment?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. And I think that's where it gets really exciting, because every state has a consensus, has a point at which it can be the most ambitious for life that it can be. If you outstrip that, you do possibly, set yourself back, because you haven't been able to save as many as you thought, and because you didn't win, right? Say, a Life at Conception Act in North Carolina, if it would, where I'm from, like, don't live there, but from, so I feel like I know it. If that was the only option and that was the only thing on the table, and we lost it, we lose the opportunity to save thousands and thousands of lives in North Carolina, because we weren't realistic about what could pass. It's not weak to be accurate. It is weak to under-evaluate what could be. It is weak to say, oh, it really, you don't want to ever not be ambitious. My thought is you kind of go with your gut plus one league longer, where you're comfortable isn't always where you should be, where your ambition should be, right? So I think that it is the state legislatures and the Congress the state legislatures are the laboratory of democracy. They show us how you achieve ambitious consensus. And I think we're going to start seeing that. I mean, I'm already talking to so many governors who are excited about this, sincerely. That is different from 10 years ago. I don't think they would have been excited about it then. I think they would have been terrified then. And so it is exciting to be talking with them and to the Congress about what can this political body bear, and how strong can we be?
And of course, the opposition is pretty strong. I mean, the left has done a very good job of characterizing Planned Parenthood as this sort of angelic organization that is just there to take care of women. And I think some myth debunking is in order when it comes to Planned Parenthood about what services they actually provide, because that's the great debate, the great national debate is Planned Parenthood an abortion organization, or is it just a family planning organization and women's health organization? These are 2 different things. Right. And so What outside of abortions, what services does Planned Parenthood really provide to women?
Well, the two different pieces of this. One, if you're pregnant, over 96% of clients get an abortion. So that is why they are the nation's #1 abortion provider. That is why they've gone through so many presidents lately, some who wanted to increase services in other areas and kind of downplayed themselves as the chief abortion provider in the nation. That didn't work to their board. They kept moving on to, okay, we're the advocates for abortion. That's who we are. Let's go ahead and be who we are. So taking the name Parenthood out of their name would be accurate, but will never happen because that's part of their sort of civic-minded sort of image. They'll always keep Planned Parenthood as their title, as their name. But I think otherwise their services are, their STDs and contraception, and really not that many. That area, we track this every year. That area of other than abortion services diminishes every year, and the number of abortion they provide increases percentage-wise, even though abortions in the country are trending downward because of the education on this issue. So they definitely are not providing what your basic community health service organization would provide. We did all this work during the Planned Parenthood debates, of where we almost defunded Planned Parenthood on the federal level, and we found that an average of 21-to-1 community health providers that didn't provide abortion to abortion providers existed all over the country. And those community health services, those community health providers are closer, and they're more comprehensive than the Planned Parenthoods. So they really don't really make sense.
Where do they get this 4% number? Planned Parenthood states that abortions are only 4% of the services, so it's literally the exact opposite of the number you just stated. So how do they? But that's been debunked by even left-leaning sites. So how do they get to this number, though?
Yeah, it's just like every time they hand a contraceptive over.
Okay. So they count all of these tiny little interactions.
Like you've got a bowl of what do you call them?
Condoms?
Thank you. A bowl of condoms. It is like, 100 service. That's how that number happens.
I see. Yes. Yeah. So thousands of these pretty meaningless services. Every interaction is a service, and then now you can say, well, I mean, the abortion itself is 4%, and all of the other let's say tests and meetings that took place right before the abortion don't count as an abortion, and so that's how they do it.
And that's why the way to look at it, at least from our perspective, is once you're pregnant, what are the services that you get? That's the 96%. I might even be more than 96%. It's at least 96 once you're pregnant, and so that's where the difference is.
And there was always this myth that they're doing a bunch of mammograms, pre-cancer screenings, all of these things, prenatal care. I mean, do they do any of that? Does it depend on which Planned Parenthood you go to? What's that truth? Well,
they did claim mammograms for a while, and then they kind of came to light that they actually don't. They contract out, and but it does differ from Planned Parenthood to Planned Parenthood, because when you start to get the big barns Planned Parenthood, like huge ones, like they have a couple of those in Illinois and Texas, then size makes a difference. But no matter how you cut it, the services that community health centers provide are far more comprehensive. They're far more convenient, meaning they're closer to you, and they don't provide abortions. So the idea that somehow, women are harmed because our governments don't fund their services is beyond laughable if you really look at the map of where you can actually get help and how much help you can get there.
So right now the court is currently deliberating the Mississippi abortion case, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. At the heart of it, the court's deciding whether all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. but it's also determining if the precedent of Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey can be overturned. A couple parts to this, the Viability Framework. I'm wondering, can you explain quickly what that is and how it was created through Roe and Casey?
Yeah. So Roe set up a trimester system and said and the bottom line is it described each trimester and when there could be regulation of abortion. The bottom line is never, because there's a companion decision with that called Doe v. Bolton, and it basically, those two decisions together prescribe any regulation on abortion up until the end, because it's always the health of the mother exception, or and health is described as psychological health, any sort of health, size of family, anything. So that was the trimester system. And then when Casey came along, it knocked out the whole trimester system. It replaced it with a viability standard and an undue burden test. You can't do anything you can't put an undue burden on a woman's ability to have an abortion. Well, there's all these different standards. Gorsuch calls it a standard stew. So whenever you're looking at a decision, you just kind of or you're looking at a case, you can pull out something that might work in that particular case. There isn't a clear, bright standard about when it's okay and when it's not okay to limit abortion or regulate it at all. And that's why it's such a mess. And the viability standard has changed. It's changed a week for every decade since Roe versus Wade. It started out at around 29 weeks. Now it's around 23, something like that. But it changes. So a legal standard that changes every decade is not a certain and reliable legal standard. So that's the case that Mississippi has made, that many of Mika's briefs make. So those standards have changed, but going after the viability standard has been our goal, and in cooperation with, obviously, legislators. It's why we introduced the 20-week pain-capable bill, because it's right before viability. It's why we asked, and he agreed, President Trump to really advocate for that 20-week bill, and on legislatures across the country, all sorts of different, in addition, pre-viability challenges to Roe. It happens that the 15-week Mississippi challenge is the one that made it there. That's the one they agreed to take up. We'll find out, and who knows in heaven why they picked that one, but I'm really glad they did, because it's very clearly before viability, 15 weeks. The pain of the child and the science behind pain has been a very compelling argument for candidates, for legislators. It was mentioned, of course, in the court itself during oral arguments. And so if, as you mentioned, if the court sides with Mississippi, upholds that law, either a 5-4 or 6-3 majority, it doesn't matter, that kills the viability standard. It therefore guts Roe, and means that the power goes back to the states to legislate on this, whereas it was taken away completely, knocked down all those laws in 1973. It could come up with a new standard. Most of the people that I read and talk to and follow from the most curmudgeonly jurisprudence experts in the world that I know, think that it's going to be really tough for them to come up with a new standard that is more which is less arbitrary than the viability standard. And so, the whole jurisprudence of Roe has been has talked about from left and right in terms of people who are experts in jurisprudence. And so how unworkable Roe has turned out to be has become such a majority topic there that to come up with a whole nother unworkable regime seems unlikely to some, but we'll see.
Yeah, we can be hopeful. And it's also important to note, I think there's a large portion of Americans that believe if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that abortion would just immediately become illegal. Of course, that's not what happens at all. It just means that the battle goes to the states, and the people decide this as we decide so many other important topics in American society. But this is the one thing that's been decided by a group of unelected judges, and just based on, and we didn't even get into this, and you don't have the time to, but just the Roe v. Wade decision on its face, just from a legal standpoint, is so absurd. it's amazing that it stood the test of time for so long, and I think it's long overdue. Just as a legal matter, forget the morality of abortion itself. It's the legal matter. It has to be overturned because it's breathtaking. It is breathtaking. It's trying to use the Fourth Amendment as a reasoning for abortion. That's nonsense. Mm-hmm. And but it's also
Ginsburg. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, even Ginsburg. What?
Even Ginsburg said that it created more controversy than it ever settled. It was the whole point of Roe was to settle this for you guys. You keep arguing. We're going to be the big man here. And literally they were all men. Not that there's a problem with that, but whatever. We're going to be the big guy. We're going to be dad, step in, resolve this problem for you. And what happens in an unjust moment like that is that the battle gets bigger. It doesn't get smaller. And it did get bigger. So she was right. It didn't resolve. It didn't resolve. I think if she had written it, she would have written it maybe in a way that, I don't know, would have been a better, maybe it would have withstood the test of time better. But yeah, it just is an incredible overreach. We do polling all the time. And one of them consistently comes out to be true is that the people of this country don't think that their elected officials and not unelected judges ought to make the law here. And you're right. They also think that they like Roe, but it's because they don't understand that they want limits that Roe doesn't allow. I think that will all become clear.
Yeah, and most people, I think most people want about a 12-week limit. They think that for some reason that feels reasonable. Now that is arbitrary. No matter what number you choose, it's arbitrary because why is an 11-week fetus somehow less valuable to the point where you can kill it than a 12-week? And I understand the need for some kind of standards and consensus, but all of these numbers are, in the end, arbitrary. But it's certainly going to take time to convince more and more people of that. And it's and for instance, young women will vote Democrat 100% just because of this issue.
Some.
And of course, not all,
some.
But
yeah. Well, I think we'll see. This movement has gotten more younger and younger.
I've noticed,
and
things to be optimistic
and so
about.
I mean that's exciting, and it's required. After it's possible that we have an entirely new pro-life movement coming this summer, and I think meaning with a completely different job. A need for new leadership, state by state, gaps in leadership, and so much hope out there. And it's really exciting. It's an exciting time to be in this movement and think about the future and the millions of lives that can be saved and might be saved with the overturn of this. But more importantly, the work that they do to pass laws that will save lives after Roe is overturned.
No, I think it is a time to be optimistic, and I hope we do transition to that new era where it becomes about legislative persuasion. And that's the battles that I like to take on is policy persuasion.
That's what you're good at.
Trying to convince people of our values.
Yeah. Well, nobody's better than that than you. I love watching you on the floor. You are convincing. I'm very happy that you're on our side, not the other side.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have really enjoyed following you and all your battles, but obviously particularly this one.
Well, we should also, of course, give you a lot of credit because without the information, without the activism that occurs on the outside, we're often powerless. So it's a team effort. We appreciate what you do at Susan B. Anthony. I think it's really incredible. And looking forward to this week. There's going to be a lot of supporters up here. So, Marjorie Dannenfelser, thank you so much for being on. Thank you for going past your time with me. I appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun. I look forward to next time.